DDR1. DDR1 came out in 2000, and it was made because computers were getting harder to run. Before DDR RAM, computers used SD RAM. The problem with SD RAM is that it could only move one set of data per cycle, so it was too slow. That made PCs stutter and take longer to load when you tried to open things. DDR was created to fix that by sending data twice per cycle compared to SDRAM, so computers immediately felt more responsive. DDR1 could go up to an effective 400 MHz and usually topped out around 1 GB per stick, which was enough for web browsing, office work, and light games like Doom. But DDR1 also had a downside. It ran at 2.5 volts, which is high for RAM. Higher voltage means more power use, and that also means more heat. When RAM runs too hot, the system can freeze or crash. And it didn't help that DDR1 was common during the Windows Millennium Edition era, which was known for being unstable. So you had the heat problem on the hardware side, and then Windows ME also caused plenty of random errors on the software side. DDR2. DDR2 came out in 2004 as the next step after DDR1. It pushed higher speeds, starting around 400 MHz on basic models and reaching around 800 MHz on higher-end versions. It also supported bigger sizes, usually around 2 GB to 4 GB per stick, which helped computers run more programs at once. Another change with every RAM generation is the notch placement, and DDR2 moved the notch to a different spot so you couldn't mix it up with DDR1. The bigger improvement was power. DDR2 dropped the voltage to 1.8 volts, so it used less electricity and produced less heat than DDR1. The problem was the price. DDR2 was expensive when it first launched, and the value wasn't always great compared to DDR1. Also, upgrading often meant buying a new motherboard that supported DDR2, so a lot of people simply stayed on DDR1 instead. DDR3. DDR3 arrived in 2007, and this is the generation that helped computers become more common for everyday people. One reason was efficiency. DDR3 reduced the voltage to 1.5 volts. That made desktop PCs run cooler, and it also helped laptops get better battery life. DDR3 speeds were higher too, generally from about 800 to 1600 MHz, and capacity improved to around 4 GB to 8 GB per stick, which made it solid for gaming, light photo editing, and heavier multitasking. One of the most important things people associate with DDR3 is dual-channel setups becoming widely used. With 2 matching sticks, the system can move memory data faster than with 1 stick, so everything feels snappier. Dual channel also matters a lot for integrated graphics. A dedicated graphics card has its own memory, called VRAM, but an integrated GPU doesn't. It uses your system RAM instead for visuals, so dual channel can improve smoothness and even raise FPS in games on integrated graphics. If you use dual channel, it's best to pair sticks that match in speed, and ideally the same model. This is true for DDR3, DDR4, and DDR5. If you combine different speeds, it usually still works, but everything runs at the slower stick speed. And even if you force settings in the BIOS, you might get instability later. Mixing brands can also work, but it can sometimes cause random errors because different brands may use different memory chips or designs. Even though DDR3 was a big improvement, computers around 2007 could still feel heavy. That wasn't only about RAM. A big reason was Windows Vista. Vista was known for using a lot of resources, especially with its 3D transparent arrow interface. It looked modern, but it could make systems feel laggy, and games from that era, like Crysis, were also extremely demanding. So a lot of the smoothness people expected from DDR3 really became more obvious a few years later when Windows 7 took over. DDR4. DDR4 came out in 2014 and became the standard for modern PCs for a long time. Common DDR4 speeds are around 2,400 MHz up to 3,600 MHz, and typical stick sizes are much larger, like 8 GB to 16 GB per stick. That made DDR4 great for video editing, programming, streaming, and AAA gaming. DDR4 also lasted a long time because it matched well with the software of its era, and it became so common that many people still use it today. And because modern programs are heavy, there are basic RAM amounts that are good to know. 8 GB is the minimum for simple tasks like browsing and office work, but it isn't recommended anymore because apps like Google Chrome can use a lot of RAM. In real use, it can feel limiting because you can only keep a few programs open comfortably. That's why 16 GB is the sweet spot for most people. It's ideal for multitasking, and it's also commonly listed in requirements for AAA games and video editing. 32 GB is better for heavier work like programming or engineering, and it's also great if you're gaming while streaming and running other apps at the same time. More RAM does help, but only up to a point. If a game needs about 12 gigabytes to run properly, playing with 8 gigabytes can still be possible, but performance will suffer. At 12 gigabytes, it should feel smooth because you're meeting what it needs. Going from 12 gigabytes to 16 gigabytes usually won't boost FPS much more because the system already has enough memory for that workload. DDR5. DDR5 came out in 2020 as the high-end option for demanding workloads. It starts around 4,800 MHz and goes up to around 6,000 MHz or more, and it comes in larger capacities like 8 gigabytes, 16 gigabytes, or 32 gigabytes per stick. This is useful for heavy tasks like 3D rendering, 4K video editing, and high-end gaming, which is why many performance laptops and gaming PCs use DDR5 now. With the same setup, demanding games often perform better with DDR5 than with DDR4, especially in situations where memory speed matters. DDR5 also includes on-die error correction features inside the chip, which helps catch and fix small internal data issues during long or heavy workloads. But all of this comes with one downside. DDR5 costs more than older generations. And for everyday use, DDR4 is still more than enough for most people. On top of that, RAM prices can also rise during shortage periods, especially when data centers and AI workloads increase demand for memory.